Despite enormous progress in medicine, women's health remains an area that is under-researched, underdiagnosed, and undertreated. Every day, women struggle with diseases that affect them exclusively, disproportionately, or differently. Welcome to Artemis Women's Health Foundation, where we help to turn ideas into medical solutions. Developing scientific ideas into better treatments takes entrepreneurship, time, money, and know-how. Successful innovation only happens if scientists and entrepreneurs work together with doctors and patients, investors, and industry experts. Artemis is a nonprofit organization that helps to connect these stakeholders through different initiatives. Our database makes finding innovative projects easy, and our webinars provide tailored guidance for startups. Through focused meetups, we connect innovators with investors and industry experts. And in our roundtables, we jointly identify ways to overcome important hurdles holding back women's health, thereby supporting scientists and startups in this space. Join Artemis Women's Health Foundation, accelerating innovation in women's health together.
Hello, everybody, and we from the Artemis team would like to welcome you to the webinar Business Development in Women's Health. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our partners Roche, Ferring, Pierre, Fabre, and 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝗀 𝗏𝘂𝑟 for their generous support. I'm Liliane Brunner Halbach, a co-founder of the Artemis Women's Health Foundation. We're glad to co-organize today's webinar with Andy Meyerson from Locust Walk. In addition, we are speaking today with the directors of business development of two companies active in women's health, with Kanony Truc from Pierre Fabre and Casper Johansen from Ferring Pharmaceuticals. In today's webinar, we want to achieve three things. First, speak about the current state of affairs in women's health business development. Second, give you insights into how companies like Pierre Fabre and Ferring approach business development in women's health. And third, provide you with a framework for strategic partnering. Andy, let's start with you. Welcome. It's great having you here today. You are the managing director of Locust Walk in Boston. Can you tell us in a few sentences who Locust Walk is and how you work with startups?
Sure, absolutely. And first off, just another big thank you to the sponsors of the group. I think it's actually a big part of what we're going to be talking about today as it relates to BD with pharmas in particular. And I think the sponsors are a good signal as to who's actually interested. So Locust Walk is a life science focused investment and merchant bank. We're headquartered in Boston, which is where I'm located. But we also have offices in New York, San Francisco, and Tokyo. So we run our Asia business through Tokyo. We cover Europe predominantly through Boston, although we're deeply connected throughout the continent. What we do is we focus on corporate development. So we do corporate strategy, we do strategic transactions, and we do capital raising for private companies. And so we answer key questions around your business plan that really allow you to understand what deal to do with who, why, when, where, etc. And then the execution against those plans, whether raising private capital from investors or pursuing any form of BD transaction, predominantly licenses and collaborations, but also M&A like any other bank.
Thank you for this introduction. You work with startups across all therapeutic areas. What are some of the specific dynamics or challenges when it comes to business development in women's health?
Yeah, it's interesting. We work with companies of all sizes, so from startups all the way through to the big pharmas. And as you can imagine, the types of things that we do for the companies changes depending on their particular needs, where they are in their own corporate growth and development. I think as it relates to startups within women's health, I think that the biggest issues are probably more being driven at this point on the investment side versus the BD side, just in terms of the general knowledge. I'm not going to call it lack of interest. I'm going to call it lack of knowledge in the women's health space in general, which has resulted in maybe less investment that you may have seen versus other areas like oncology or immunology or some of these other therapeutic areas. And I think part of what that results in is it means more education is needed as part of every process, whether BD or investment, to help people understand the unmet need, to help people understand how you're particularly approaching a disease, and really in particular building the business case around health outcomes, around economic impacts. Obviously, women's health is just an enormous issue affecting the population. But as you look on a disease by disease basis, how do you actually define what even women's health is, what's the opportunity, et cetera. And so there's a substantial unmet need. There's been research gaps in understanding how diseases work, and so the end result is just more education is needed.
Yeah, fully agree. At what stages do business development or does partnering happen in women's health deals? Is it the same as in other areas?
So it's not the same, and it's partly driven by which part of women's health you're speaking to. And so there are some areas that are more well established, like contraception or fertility, menopause type treatments, things that have traditionally been quote unquote the women's health realm of therapies that are out there. For those particular areas, the deals tend to be later stage. I think it's primarily driven, and I'm sure Claire and Casper will speak to this as well, but primarily driven because there have been drugs that have already been available on the market for a long time addressing these particular issues. It is known kind of what a quote unquote standard of care starts to look like. And so the incremental value of programs don't really start to play out until you get those key efficacy endpoints. And so usually the BD transactions are happening later stage. And that's what typically happens in more mature therapeutic markets. There are other areas, like certain areas of oncology that are more women's health focused, like ovarian cancer or breast cancer, although there's some obviously instances of breast cancer in men. But then other things where earlier stage deals are a little bit more common, endometriosis, uterine fibroids, some of these other diseases that are becoming much more in focus. It's possible to get earlier stage deals, but then it all comes down to your likelihood of differentiation. What is the program that you're putting together? What is the risk profile, et cetera? And I think women's health, like any other therapeutic area, it's always driven by a combination of interest by counterparties as well as data burden. And that always is going to shift on a disease basis. If it shifts on a modality basis, it shifts on a number of things. But I think women's health in general tends to be later stage, which is why that investment gap becomes so much more important.
Okay. Interesting. So, and what are some of the recent financing and M&A trends for women's health?
Yeah, it's been interesting over the last couple of years. For a while, I don't think it'd be a surprise to hear that women's health was not at the forefront of people's ideas as to where they wanted to make their investment decisions. It was viewed as being very primary care focused. It was viewed as being really just around the contraception. And there's just a lack of interest in a lot of these women's health indications. I think as a result of a number of things, at least here in the United States, including the IRA and the impact that has in investment decisions, as well as decisions by strategics in terms of where to actually try to commercialize. Large disease areas are suddenly much more important. And so things that were previously ignored, like obesity, like a COPD, like these other like areas of cardiovascular health, are suddenly becoming much more in focus. And I think also as we think through patient segmentation, things that are disproportionately impacting women, certain cardiac diseases, for instance, are suddenly becoming more of interest because the business case becomes clearer. So we're seeing more general investors adding women's health into what they're saying they're looking for from an investment thesis perspective. We're talking to call it the top 180 biotech investors at all points in time as to know where their interests are. And we're seeing the trend. Women's health is being mentioned more, and that's good. So we're going to see more of these financings, and there's been a number of companies that have been financed. It's still well behind other therapeutic areas. And they also tend to be earlier stage because these are newer companies. The established companies in women's health have essentially grown up into Ferring and Pierre Fabre and others. And so as these new companies continue to grow and they become more mid-stage and later, I think you'll see more trends than M&A. And within financings right now, there's just not a large enough N to see anything meaningful.
But still, can you say who are the potential partners and acquirers of these women's health companies? Is it very specific ones, or is it more broader interest?
It's been very interesting because the names are shifting, right? So we can look through the sponsors of today between Roche and Ferring and Pierre Fabre and Gideon Richter. Bayer's traditionally been there. And so you're seeing, Organon's been there. So you're seeing sort of a typical, it used to be a very tight-knit group of companies that were interested in women's health. There are some regional players that are women's health focused. Some Japanese companies are very focused within women's health, for instance. But what we're hearing from the pharmas is also a shift. And so there are some non-traditional players that we're going to find starting to show up in women's health. The issue that we're running into is what I was saying before about the stage of development of many of the assets is not at the right stage for them to want to do anything. So although they're saying they're interested, they're both getting up to speed to learn about pathways, learning about mechanisms, learning about the things that the more traditional players have already well understood. And so we're, I think, at the very beginning of a likely trend up and which partners are interested, what do the deals look like? And it's going to be the kind of thing where, like any other therapeutic area, it's going to come down to patient segmentation. What does pricing look like? How do you commercialize? Is the business case going to make sense? And if the business case for drug makes more sense than the business case for any other therapeutic area, if the pharmas are intelligent, which we know they are, they're going to go off and they're going to do it. So at least our view is that women's health is one of the next wave of areas like obesity, like others, where there's going to be a material drug that is discovered that has a big impact across the board. That's going to really put an emphasis on the area.
Yeah, that's great to hear that investors and pharma companies are really, there is like a broadening of interest, which is fantastic. Not so strong yet, but there is a trend.
It's early. It's starting to get more interest.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot. That was a great introduction to market trends in women's health transaction activities. We will come back to you for more insights later. Next, let's hear from the two pharma companies why they are interested in women's health. And I would like to start with you, Claire. Claire Kanony from Pierre Fabre Laboratoire in France. Hi, Claire. It's great to have you here. Can you give us, to start with, an introduction to Pierre Fabre and where women's health stands in the portfolio of Pierre Fabre?
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you so much, Liliane and Artemis, for giving me the opportunity to participate to this exciting discussion. So Pierre Fabre is a French company, which was founded in the early 60s by Mr. Pierre Fabre, who was a pharmacist. Today, we are almost 10,000 employees, in 43 subsidiaries spread over the 5 continents, and the group generated 2.8 billion in sales, billion euros in sales in 2023. Since its creation, Pierre Fabre has been developing and selling innovative products in the fields of pharmaceuticals on one hand, including family healthcare, and also dermocosmetics on the other hand. This is something which is very specific to our company, I believe, as there has always been this coexistence between the two business pillars. When it comes to our pharmaceutical branch, Pierre Fabre Medical Care, it weighs 1 billion euros and includes 3 different franchises: innovative oncology, which I will not discuss a lot today, but however includes products and treatments for breast cancer, for instance, so for women for sure, dermatology and pharmaceutical care, which is the highest contributor to the turnover, accounting for 2/3. And pharmaceutical care is actually the franchise gathering our historical products in 3 strategic therapeutic areas, which are rheumatology, urology, and of course, women's health. What I wanted to say to you is actually that when I was preparing this introduction, I realized that the first product ever developed by our company, which is cyclothrip-4, is a venotonic containing rhuscus extract. And it's actually part of our women's health portfolio, as 80% of the target patients are actually women. But that's not the major product. That's not our flagship product in women's health, which is actually 𝗤𝘗𝘂𝘀. It's a range of ferrous sulfate formulation indicated for the treatment and prevention of anemia. In this range, we have specific formulations dedicated to pregnant women, which are a combination of iron and folic acid. And actually, 83% of the target patients for those 𝗤𝘗𝘂𝘀 products are women, from teenager having her first periods and encountering anemia problems to senior women. And of course, I mentioned pregnant women. So 𝗤𝘗𝘂𝘀𝘀 is definitely a range of products for women of any age and in any situation, I would say. And it is very well known by gynecologists, midwives, and general practitioners. To give you a full overview of what the portfolio in women's health is, I should also mention that we have contraceptive pills in this portfolio. And so besides these historical products, our objective is to attract new opportunities to enrich this offer. And we do so thanks to relevant and promising partnerships that we set up with other companies. And it is really our priority to identify innovative treatments to build this offer further. And we can leverage our pan-European field forces to ensure a successful commercial target of those products.
Thank you very much, Claire, for this introduction. I would also like to welcome Casper to this webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Ferring is one of the few companies with a strong focus in women's health. Can you also tell us a bit more about Ferring?
Sure, happy to, and thanks very much, Liliane. Super happy to be with you all here today to talk more about what we do here in Ferring and how we really work with innovators in this space. So Ferring is a privately owned, research-driven specialty pharma company that's really truly committed to building families and helping people live better lives. As you said, we're leaders in reproductive medicine and maternal health. And we also operate in specialty areas within gastroenterology and urology and uro-oncology. Ferring really, at its core, aims to be the world-leading and most trusted healthcare company in reproductive medicine and maternal health. I think we're one of the few companies, if not the only, that offers the full spectrum of products from conception to birth. And the therapeutic area inside Ferring represents 54% of our annual revenue. So I think it's fair to say that reproductive medicine and maternal health, which is how we in Ferring defined our interest in the women's health space, is really truly at the core of what we do and what we put a lot of our focus on. Our current portfolio ambitions are centered around a desire to advance our fertility leadership with the ambition to empower all aspiring patients, parents to build families. And what that concretely means is that we're seeking to advance both internal research and development programs, and of course, looking for a lot of good collaborators and researchers, mainly in three sub-pillars, you can say. One of them is around the fertility side of the equation. So anything related to infertility conditions on both the female and male side of the equation. Quite often when we talk about women's health, we actually forget a pretty large proportion of the population that has a role to play there. The male side of the equation, I think it's one of the only indications where, you know, if the female has an issue, you treat the female. If the male has an issue, you treat the female. So it's one of those areas where there really truly is a big unmet need, and it's one that we're also focusing in on. Then we're also focused on gynecological indications that are linked with infertility. That would be indications like endometriosis, PCOS, bacterial vaginosis, and so on. And then to kind of complement that, we're also looking to advance and partner on opportunities in pregnancy complications, such as preeclampsia and preterm birth.
Thank you very much for that overview of Ferring's activities. Now back to you, Claire. Can you walk us through one of the latest acquisitions in the women's health space at Pierre Fabre?
Yes, with pleasure. We are very excited as we are now in the launch process of a new treatment for overactive bladder. The name of the product is 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝗶𝘲𝗀, the active principle being Vibegron. It's a new beta-3 adrenergic agonist. And this new treatment will be actively promoted to gynecologists, but also urologists, as the indication is at the border between gynecology and urology. In fact, we licensed this product 2 years ago from a company named Eurovant, which is now part of Sumitomo Pharma, and we were granted license rights for Europe. The product was then already commercialized in the US under the name 𝗕𝘂𝘀 and was ready to be registered in Europe. So Pierre Fabre has been in charge of the registration process through an EMA centralized procedure and also specific procedures in UK and Switzerland additionally. We obtained the marketing authorization approval from EMA in July this year, so that's really recent. And we have already launched the product in 3 countries between end of September and mid-October this year, so in UK, Germany, and Belgium. The next launches are planned in 2025. They are determined by market access activities, which Pierre Fabre is also responsible for. And the last launch will be in Switzerland in 2026. I think actually that this agreement between Eurovant and Pierre Fabre is a very good example of what we do in terms of BD in the women's health field also. Our mission, as I was mentioning before, is to attract new projects that are innovative, that are backed by strong scientific and clinical evidences, that can be eligible to reimbursement, depending on the countries, and that will be efficiently promoted by our field forces. So, for that, I think this project ticks all the boxes. And it's also, I think, a good example of an efficient partnering process with an agreement that has been set up in 12 months roughly. If I count, the time between the first contact with Eurovant and the time when we actually signed the agreements. And now I think it is also efficiently handled by alliance managers on both sides who can ensure an excellent execution of the deal. So yeah, so that's for the most recent acquisition.
Yeah, great, thanks. But besides the business development department, Pierre Fabre has also since recently an investment arm. At what stages are the 2 parties interested to get involved? And is this also true? Is this the same for women's health assets as for other assets?
Yes. So in fact, we would consider different development stages depending if we are looking at licensing or acquisition agreements or investment. For licensing, our focus is more on late clinical stage opportunities, I would say. This being said, I think it's relevant to enter in agreement before finalizing phase 3 clinical trial protocols so that we can align with the partner on regulatory and market access requirements to ensure the best chances for registration and also reimbursement in Europe. We can bring our expertise and knowledge for those critical topics. But we are, for licensing, I would say that we are more and more often considering projects that are a bit more upstream. For instance, phase 2B ready projects, if at least they have demonstrated a clinical proof of concept. So that's for licensing. And so you were mentioning that we have also indeed, since 2 years, structured better, let's say, our investment strategy through our investment arm, which is called Pierre Fabre Invest. For us, Pierre Fabre Invest is really the means to invest in companies or assets that may not be mature enough yet to consider a license or acquisition, but which may serve the group strategy in a medium term, let's say. So thanks to Pierre Fabre Invest, we may look at opportunities that have not yet reached the clinical stage, but which are based on an innovative approach, which have already gathered some encouraging results. So we can consider companies that are about to enter into clinical stage, which are fundraising Series A or further. It's actually the same strategy that we apply for women's health than for other strategic therapeutic areas for the group. We do not make any distinction between therapeutic areas when it comes to this investment strategy.
Okay, that's great. Great to hear. Let's move over to you, Casper. Could you describe the different ways in which Ferring interacts with startups and researchers in the women's health space?
Sure. Very happy to give you an overview of the different ways in which we try to work with and collaborate with those stakeholders. Indeed, I think as Andy said earlier on, right? I think it's widely recognized that the number of innovations in the space haven't been the greatest in recent past or ever. So I think here in Ferring, we really recognize the fact that in general there is a low innovation density in our indications of interest, meaning that we've seen very few companies really making it to the clinical stages and really be given a chance to prove that the medicinal products they're working on can make a difference for the patients at the end of the day. And as a pharmaceutical company who has the ambition to be leaders in this space, we attempt to be an active part of resolving some of those underlying issues that lies behind that. So I think we try to work with this and help resolve this in a multifaceted approach. Where on one hand side, we actively work with leading academic institutions to advance the basic biology understanding of the diseases with high unmet need in our areas of interest. I don't believe that as of today we have a good enough understanding around the basic biology of many of these diseases, and as such it's really hard to create good targeted therapies for them that can really help be disease modifying in nature, and as such we really try to work with some of those people to advance that understanding. We always do it, I should add, with a kind of a translational mindset at the forefront, right? Always looking towards future development of novel product candidates and therapeutic strategies in general. And we've done a number of these partnerships in the past with different academic institutions. The most long-standing one we have is with the Chinese Academy of Science, where we've worked with them for a number of years in advancing our understanding in that area. A different but synergistic effort that we're also working from is trying to work with the broader innovation ecosystem. So trying to partner out with different types of player in the area, I believe to be truly crucial to really advancing the underlying science that we want to partner with at the end of the day. So we have for a number of years been working with an institution called Bioinnovation Institute in Copenhagen, where we have a strategic collaboration to really accelerate innovation in the women's health area. In this collaboration, we're supporting BII to evaluate and potentially also co-fund and incubate early stage startups and projects within our field of interest. And really what we get from this is early access and an early view, early opportunity to interact with a lot of interesting ideas and scientific approaches. And we can hopefully help them to advance in such a way that we will see more companies successfully translating their good ideas into actual clinical candidates that can be tested in clinical studies. And then, we're also a classical pharmaceutical company with BD&L activities. So we're also seeking classical kind of co-creation, co-development partnerships on technology platforms and kind of classical BD&L activities in the space. And the one thing I will say that we always try to do, especially in reproductive medicine and maternal health, is to attempt to give very concrete feedback and guidance, even if we're not progressing forward with opportunities, to the potential partner, to really make sure that they understand what we still need to see before we can engage in a partnership and use that proactively to continue on their journey from there.
That's great, and I hope companies really benefit of this and implement your advice. Maybe can you give an example of how you helped the company at the 𝗕𝘂𝘃𝗃 through sharing your expertise in the field?
Sure. So in 2023, Ferring and 𝗕𝘂𝘃 actively backed a company called FimmCyte. That's a company that's developing a novel disease-modifying endometriosis therapy, and we did so within the framework agreement that we have with 𝗕𝘂𝘃, where we, of course, support on one hand side in terms of soft funding, in terms of money that they can actually use to advance their science and so on, right? But also what I like to call in-kind contribution, which is really aimed at giving FimmCyte the best chance of success. So what we practically did from the Ferring side of the equation is that we actively mobilized a sort of a internal project team, like we normally would on our internal research project, aimed at having a continuous conversation to give advice and guidance, feedback to the FimmCyte team from a multitude of different angles, not just on a partnership angle, but actually way more on the underlying way that they're structuring their early research, and trying to at least give them a glimpse of what it is that a pharmaceutical company would look to value at the end of the day when they reach the stage where a partnership might be feasible. So that means concretely giving them access to some of our leading experts in the area of reproductive medicine and maternal health, to be able to engage in that conversation early on. Oh, I think you're muted, Liliane.
Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful for these companies, of course. That's incredible, expertise and value for them. So generally, companies like Pierre, Fabre and Ferring tend to license on the back of clinical data, but they have also ways to support companies, not only in women's health, of course, through initiatives such as the Pierre Fabre investment arm or Ferring's cooperation with the 𝗕𝘂𝘃 incubator. Now back to Andy at Locust Walks, and you have developed a toolkit for first-time founders, which includes a guidance on business development and strategic partnering. Can you share some highlights and what topics might be different for women's health startups?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we have put together a number of slides on something we call a 𝗕𝘂𝗀𝗶𝗃 MBA. Basically, it's a guide for people just starting their first company, or maybe they started a couple companies before and they want to have guidance as to things to think about as they progress forward from a business perspective. And so, of course, the science needs to justify the creation of a company, but in terms of building a biotech, how do you go about doing that? And we've had the course regularly through a number of groups, like we can do one for Artemis, but we also do it at 𝗕𝘂𝘃. We've done it for various incubators around the world. I think as it relates to women's health, the biggest takeaway for someone thinking about starting a new company, and I hinted at this a little bit earlier and also came through both Claire and Casper's commentary, is really think about the business case from day one of what it is that you're trying to do with your therapy. We often have discussions, particularly with scientific founders, more often than others, about whether the technology or the drug or whatever it is that they ultimately are trying to put into a company, is it a business or is it a science experiment? And there's nothing wrong with science experiments. Science experiments is our advancement of knowledge. That's how we learn. And it's through experiments that we ultimately get to things that belong in a business. But if it's not quite ready to be in a business, it's important to know that early. And the way that you know that and can answer that is by thinking strategically about what is my business case? Where is my market ultimately going to be? Who is my patient? And what does that translate into from a dollars perspective, right? We're in the business of selling drugs to make money. It is still ultimately a business, even though we're having a material impact on human health. And what that actually means for companies is we advise, even from the earliest days, even while you're preclinical, think about your approval label. Think about where it's going to get used. Think about how it fits inside the competitive dynamics. We always say, the regulatory agencies are easy. Selling drugs is hard, right? Because you can't sell a drug unless you get past the regulators, but the hurdle on the regulatory approval is lower than the hurdle on the commercial success. And so think about commercial day one. And then through that, that's how you build your business cases. You can make your justifications for use of proceeds for investments in terms of the trials that you're designing, again, with an eye towards commercial, not just an eye towards approval, or not just towards the regulatory agencies. And then also finally thinking about who your customer ultimately is. I think for most women's health biotechs that are getting started right now, the likelihood that you will ever commercialize is quite low, given the nature of a number of these indications. And so although your ultimate user is the patient, your customer is actually Claire and Casper, because they're the ones who are likely to pick up the baton and carry the drug over the finish line and bring it into commercialization. And so think about what it is that they need off of even what they just talked about today, and you build towards your exit, which is what your investors fundamentally are looking for. And if you keep that in mind as you progress forward, your strategy starts to shift a little bit along the way. Some people want to commercialize, depends, again, very much on the indication. There are some that you might be able to, but in most cases, always think about your customer. It's like every business. And in our business, the customer is likely the larger company who will either be in licensing or acquiring the product.
What are things that startups need to consider beyond the business case and like aligning their strategy and development plan with commercial interests?
Yeah, I think that one of the mistakes that a number of companies make is they undercapitalize. They don't run the right trial to generate the right robustness of data to give the larger companies the comfort that the signals that they're seeing in the data are believable. And there's always a balance in terms of, well, just how much do you spend on a trial? And is generating any data better than no data? Yes, but if the data is not going to tell you something that's really meaningful, then was that really the right use of, for an extra couple $1 million, you would have had an extra 100 patients, or I mean, the math is wrong. For a couple $1 million, you would have had another 10 or 15 patients. That could be super meaningful because you may actually have statistical significance, even if you weren't necessarily powering it that way. And being able to enable people to believe in your product, people meaning the folks who will be picking it up and running with it, is at some point you're not going to be able to continue to fund. That's how you ultimately get success. It gives you the validation for your next program. It gives you everything you need that allows that snowball to get going to build a sustainable business.
Mm-hmm. And at what time do you recommend companies to partner? I mean, what do you see? Like, is it? Yeah.
It's a hard question to answer because it's always driven by the individual company and strategically what it is that you want to do. And it comes down to, are you a single product company? Are you a platform? Are you a multi-product company? And we always want to ask the question, why are you doing this? What is it trying to accomplish for you? What happens after the deal? And that's true whether you're a buyer or a seller. You should be asking those exact same questions. Why am I doing this? What does it do for me? What do I need for it to be worthwhile to me? And then what happens tomorrow? Because there's consequences of every deal. And I think particularly for a smaller biotech, a newer biotech, you're essentially making a trade-off between taking equity dilution or asset dilution. When you partner out an asset, you're taking asset dilution, the full value is no longer sitting inside the company. When you take equity dilution, you own the full asset value, but you've diluted the overall equity of the company. So the individual owners all own a little bit less, or maybe a lot less, depending on the terms. And so which is actually better if you have that choice, equity dilution or asset dilution, is one of the key things to think through as you carry forward. And the answer isn't always one or the other. And for $5 million, if you get $50 million worth of incremental value, that may be worth the investment to take the equity dilution. And it really just comes down to, again, what is the risk you want to assume? What's your access to capital? And have you generated a strong enough data package such that you can get meaningful value for what you've done?
For these types of insights and more insights, you have put together this mini MBA, this new presentation and course. How could our listeners or entrepreneurs have access to this information? Are you going to share this or?
So we will share. We're in the process of recording all of them as opposed to doing them all live. And once the recordings are available, happy to share them with the group and with Artemis broadly for people to be able to access to it. The materials that we have together focus on fundraising plans, has a little bit focused on BD, a lot of it focused on business plan and strategy as to how do you want to grow your company and what your goals ultimately are and how do you execute against goals in a way that allows you to be successful. One thing just to always keep in mind for a young company, just because someone gives you a term sheet doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And so you have to be honest with yourself in terms of, is this right? What can I do better? What will it take to do better? Or is this actually the right thing to do? And I had outsized expectations, because that also happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. This leaves us, yeah.
And of course, we're happy to talk to any company to give you our thoughts as to what you're doing. So any point, anyone on the call or elsewhere, always happy to chat, whether we can be helpful directly, indirectly. We're active in the space, and so certainly our goal is to see therapies get through development and get the patients. That's fundamentally what we're all here for.
Great, great, thank you. This leads us already to our last question to everybody. First, to Claire and Casper. Maybe Claire, you can start. What is the best time for particularly a women's health company to approach you, or for innovators, you know, maybe even earlier teams? What is your recommendation?
Yeah, well, I think I would say the sooner the better. In fact, I think for us it's really key to have the companies in our radar as soon as possible, as we have the chance to consider a wide span of transaction modalities, from minority stakes that we can take with Pierre Invest to licensing or even acquisition agreements. So if we consider that the startups or the innovators have preliminary data that may not be sufficient or mature enough, we may decide to catch up a few months later, you know, at new inflection points. But in any case, we are interested to have a connection, to be in the position to reconnect later on. We are present in many conferences, you know, general conferences such as bio conferences, or even specific women's health conference. So these are great times to meet, to discuss, to exchange on new achievements from the startups. But apart from those conferences, we are available anytime. We can be reached by LinkedIn. We can set up, you know, Teams meetings, and we are always happy and interested to hear about new achievements by those companies, and to find the right time to discuss and partner.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And for you, Casper, for Ferring, when should one reach out? And is it to you directly? Is it through BII? What are your recommendations?
Yeah, for me, the answer to that question is always now. So to kind of to lean on what Claire said, right? The sooner rather than better. I think, especially in this space, having clarity of existing of many of these things, right, allows us to engage in the conversations that we believe are meaningful, even if the conversation don't progress forward, right? There is mechanisms, as I've described before, where we can help companies progress on. It might not be only through the BII collaboration. It might be through our knowledge around certain other potential partners, VCs in the area that we know that are interested, and so on. So it's really a very important step to be very open with the potential partners super early. And I also advise all the biotech companies and startups out there to be very transparent when they engage with the pharma companies, be very crisp and clear on on their pros, on where their strength lies, but also very transparent, especially early on, around some of the challenges that they face, because actually we're potentially positioned to help them clarify how they might help address some of those issues. So as I've described before, we have vehicles to help progress and advance some of these therapies, or we're always happy to kind of lead them down a path that we believe is meaningful for them also down the road.
Thank you. And for you, Andy, what is your advice to women's health companies in that space? And thank you very much, Claire and Casper, for sharing this advice.
I think Claire and Casper are absolutely right. Like, we heard it directly from them, believe them. The earlier you can engage with potential partners, the better. There's a number of founders that we meet who always say that they're not ready, or they're worried about a particular piece of IP or something. And I think the general advice is the sooner that you can engage with your customer, right? Getting back to what I said before, the sooner you can get advice about what it is that you actually need to do to get them interested. And so it could be advice in terms of what preclinical package they require if they're going to do something on the earlier side, or what do they want to see in a phase 1 trial or a phase 2 trial, so that you can understand, okay, I've heard this from Ferring, I've heard this from Pierre Fabre, and I know that if I can show up with this data, they're going to be potentially interested. And so I know that this costs me this much money. So I now know this has to go into my financing plan in order to deliver. When I talk to investors, I can say, I've been speaking to these companies for the last number of years, and I know this is what they want. That's why I'm doing the plan that I have. And it just enables you along the way to reduce risk anywhere you can, because our business is about risk reduction. Our entire business is science experiments, right? And it's the most binary business in the world. Even now, you know if there's oil before you drill. It used to be equally binary. You have no idea if the experiment's really going to work. So whatever you can do to maximize the likelihood that your experiment, if it does work, is also going to give you the outcome that you want on top of it, is, I think, the best advice. So engage early. Don't show up necessarily asking for a deal if you're not ready for a deal. Communication doesn't mean give me a term sheet. Communication means let me tell you what I'm doing. I want to know what you think about it. Is this something that you could potentially be interested in? Here's what my plan is. I will be back to you in 6 months. This is what I'm going to have in 6 months. So you can show that you can execute and build trust in you as a potential counterparty.
Yeah, I think in general, it's building up that trust and exchanging insights and expertise, what is so crucial for early teams and also the ones further along. This leads us to the end of this episode, and thank you very much to Claire, Casper, and Andy for sharing their insights in women's health, in the women's health market, and business development strategies. And with that, I would like to highlight that after last month's webinar featuring 2 women's health entrepreneurs, a lot of people asked whether there is a chance to watch a recording. So if you missed this webinar or you want to watch it again, you have a chance to do so over the next few weeks. Please scan the QR code to access this recording. Or you can find it as well on our events page on the past episodes. Our next webinar on how to raise capital for women's health startups will take place in the first quarter of 2025. You will find this information along with other resources like our endometriosis white paper on our website, www.artemis.health, or by following us on LinkedIn. Thank you and see you soon.